Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday sew along. So we'll give just a minute to let everyone get on here. We're having a little snow today, so they say. You can't really see it yet, but they say we're going to get 5 or 6, 7 inches. We'll wait and see. It can't last too long because it's going to be 50 degrees later in the week. So welcome to our Tuesday sew along. We're going to be working on block number 16 tonight. But before we do that, I wanted to share with you something about block 14. And I was going to tell you this last week, and then I got sidetracked and forgot to do it. And so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about why I skipped block 14. Block 14 was called shuriken or shuriken. I'm not sure exactly how you would pronounce that, but this was the block number 14. And I chose to leave out some of the blocks in the Blockbuster series. First of all, I'm skipping all the blocks that include the specialty star tools, the Rapid Fire Hunter Star, the Rapid Fire Lemoyne Star, the Wedge Star Tool, the 60-degree Star Tool. All of those tools I'm choosing to leave out because I feel like those need a little more time and intense instruction than I'm offering on our Tuesday sew-alongs. But those are tools that I do offer classes using here in the shop and via Zoom. So if you are in a stitch group and you're not local and you have a bunch of friends that want to learn some of these tools, let me know because I can make a class just for your group. They're all great tools. I use them a lot and I design with them a lot. So we're going to be talking about that. So I have several questions, and I will tell you, Tony's not here tonight because we told her go home just in case it does snow. It was snowing a little while ago, but it hasn't really started causing a problem on the streets yet that I know of here locally. So Deborah wants to know if the acorn pressing pin works on wool. And if you're talking about using a wool pressing mat and using the acorn pressing pin on your fabric on top of a wool pressing mat, I do that all the time. If you're talking about sewing wool together and using the acorn pressing pin as a pressing solution or starch solution on the wool, I've not tried that. So I would assume it would work in a similar manner, but I haven't tried that. I do use the acorn pressing pin all the time on my wool pressing mat while I'm pressing my cotton pieces. So I'll try to remember to check the comments as we go. But if I forget during the course of the demonstration, then I'll go back and answer at the end. So I did want to show you why I chose not to do shuriken. And then you can also see that there's going to be some blocks in the future. If you've looked ahead at the Blockbuster patterns that are available to download at Studio 180 Design, you probably have seen several that we are going to skip. And here is why. This block is a 5-grid block. By that I mean it's not equally easily divisible by 12. Anything that is a 3-grid, a 4-grid, a 6-grid, a 2-grid, those generally will work for a 12-inch block. So I put a grid on top of this block just so you could see. So look at the very middle of that, and you can see 5 equal sections. Now there is a long section where that split Rects unit is. That even though that is actually 2 of my sections, they count together. And they make that one piece, but that's why we're skipping that because you can't make it in a 12-inch block using the tools. You can make a 10-inch block, you can make a 7.5-inch block, you can make a 15-inch block, but since we're doing all 12-inch blocks, I chose to skip the ones that don't make a 12-inch block easily with the sizes that are on our tools. So I hope that made sense. So now what we're going to do is talk about tonight's block. And tonight's block is called Peaks and Valleys. So on the overhead, I have a part of the block. So I want to show you, I could make just this part of the block using and make it in a 12-inch segment. This is not 12 inches. This is a center of our block. So I took that off just to show you, if this was a 3x6 unit, then that would mean that I could have, or I'm sorry, it would have to be a 4x8. So this would be 8 inches across plus 4, that would be my 12 inches. These are 2x4 units, so I would have 2 inches plus 2 more. That would be a 6-inch, and it serves as the center of my block. So here's the rest of the block. It's called Peaks and Valleys, and I'm just going to put the segments. And I started, as I'm making the pieces of the block, sometimes assembling sections of it so you can see what it's going to turn out to be when I get sections together. So if you'll notice, you have a very prominent section in the middle that has the diamond Rects units plus a center plain square. And then on the sides, all the sides have these units that have a high-low unit and this one is the sidekick unit. So I did that just so you could see all the separate units. And you can hardly see the pink or the cream colored fabric there to see the high-low unit. So I'm going to move this out of my way. And there's actually 2 units here. This part is my sidekick unit. This part is my high-low unit. And it is turned to the side here that creates that piece. So we're first of all going to review the diamond Rects units that we were doing last week, and then I'll review with you the high-low and the sidekick units. Remember, this is a technique sheet, so if you have that technique sheet in your sewing room, you may want to grab that so you can kind of refer to it as we go. So we are going to be looking first of all at the diamond Rects units, and we need 7. We need 4 of them. I don't know where I got 7. And I have my pieces here. There's my center square. And then I also have some rectangles that actually become my side triangles that go around the diamond Rects units, the diamond units. And then I have a strip, and on my tool, this is the diamond Rects tool, it has my information for what size pieces I need to work with. So for my diamond shapes, I'm going to look at my tool right here, and it tells me for a 2x4 center diamond, I'm going to start with a 2 3/8 or a 2.5 inch wide strip. You can use 2 3/8 and it will work just fine, but you may have an orphan strip from a jelly roll or a strip set that you would like to use, and it works just as well with that. You're going to have just a little more to trim away, but it still is a good way to use up those jelly roll strips. So I'm going to line up the line on the bottom. I want to make sure I have plenty of room here to trim to the point there. And I've got a little bit of excess up on the top. So all I have to do is cut up and across so I can get rid of that little bit there. And now I'm just going to twist this around, and I'm lining up this diagonal line with this line on those cut edges. When I get that in place, then I'm ready to cut. And remember, when you're cutting these diamond shapes, this is the shape it's going to remain. You're not going to trim anything off of this piece, so you want to handle this with care because you've got some bias edges there. When I get that first one cut, all I have to do is line up on my cut edges. This line goes on the base of the strip. This goes on the cut edge. So all I have to do is cut up and then cut across to true that up. And I've got the diamond shape that I need right there. So I could create a whole bunch of these with a whole strip. I only need 4 for this block, so that's all I'm going to cut. Then for my rectangles that go on the sides, I want to make sure that I have pairs of rectangles. And I don't know if I made that clear last week. You have to have the mirror image to go on your diamond shapes. And let me grab, this is a diamond from last week, and it's a little bit bigger than we're doing today, but it can kind of give you the idea of what I'm talking about. When you make your diamonds using your Diamond Rects tool, you have this mirror image on your rectangles on your triangles. So in order to do that, I can get all 4 pieces by using 2 rectangles. And I want to place them face to face or back to back. That way, when I make my cut, I automatically get the mirror image that I need for that unit. I also have a little window template right up here at the top, and it tells me if I'm doing a 2x4 finished Diamond Rex unit, I'm going to use 2 1/4 by 3-inch rectangles, and I can just put that window template right on top of that rectangle, and I can make my cut. So therefore, I have the 4 triangles I need that are going to surround the diamond. So let me just put this here so you can see that. So if you have your rectangles already stacked in pairs, you can stack all of them and cut them all at once. If you do that, you want to try to stack them where they're nice and tidy so you have plenty of room for your sewing. And I think I can get this, and I will have plenty of room here, so I'm just going to line this up on the edges here. It's a 2 1/4 by 3-inch rectangle. When I get that done, I'm going to separate it so I know I have what I need to surround my diamond. So I have all my diamonds stacked up here, and let's just separate these and make sure I have the right number of triangles. When I get them in place, I'm ready to start stitching. And remember last week we also talked about it's a really good idea to lay these here and check and make sure that you have 4 for each of your diamonds, because if you don't have these, you're going to have a problem when it's time to sew. So I have 4 triangles on each side of my diamond shape, and I'm going to pick up the whole ruler and carry this to my sewing area. That way I know I have all the pieces that I need. So welcome. We have a couple of people that said they were running late, but they're here. So welcome. We're glad you're here to join us. So I have my pieces on top of my ruler just here on my cutting or my sewing area. And I want to make sure that I am ready to stitch. Now, I also talked about the fact that this diamond shape is the size it's going to remain. I'm not going to trim it down. I will trim, and when I trim, the triangles will get trimmed. So that is the part that's going on the bottom next to my feed dogs. My diamond shape is going to go on the top next to my presser foot, and I'm going to line up the point with the point. This little flat part is going to land right in the middle of my diamond across this part right here, and it's going to hang off of the end. That's the way I want it because that gives me the wiggle room I need when it's time to trim. And I'm going to stitch off of my fabric tag right onto my diamond shape. And I'm going to do this 4 times. So I'm going to grab another one. And I will show you when I get all 4 of these done what my stack looks like. Match up the point to the point. Let that excess hang off the end. And we're going to stitch right on. And I'm lining up especially with my diamond shape. I don't have to fuss too much with the triangle shape. It's going to get trimmed. But the diamond shape, it needs to stay as precise as possible. So point to point, let the little flat part hang off the bottom. That seam. And I've got one more diamond. Match up the point to point and let the flat part hang off the bottom of that seam and stitch right along the edge. It's always more efficient to do assembly line sewing, but if this is your first time of making diamond rectangle units, it might be a good idea to make one, maybe even out of scrap fabric, just to make sure everything is going to turn out the way you want it. So I have my 4 diamond shapes with 1 triangle on them, and I want to show you now what my board looks like. There's my stack. My diamond was here in the middle, and I did all of the top left triangles. Now I'm going to do all of the bottom right triangles because you want to stitch the opposite sides onto the diamond. So I can just flip the whole thing around, and I want to match up the point to the point again, and the little flat part's going to end up hanging off the bottom of that seam. So we're going to just grab that. Let me adjust the camera so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just sewing off of my fabric tag. I'm lining up with my presser foot right here. And just stitch right off the end. An assembly line. Put these together, and I'm putting that bottom right triangle on. I like to sew with the diamond shape on top, but I know that there are some of you that prefer to stitch it the other way. I just find I have better results, more precise results, if I stitch with that diamond shape on top. So again, we're going to go here and line up. We're lining up right there with the edge of my presser foot. And one more. And I've got my 4 diamond shapes. This block, even if you decided just to make this for this your 12-inch block, remember you would need to change the size of your diamond Rex units. You would need a 4x8 unit, and this tool will do that. So you could make just this center section in a 12-inch version and not make those surrounding side kicks and high-lows. All right, so now I've got my first 2 triangles stitched on, and in order to stitch the next side on, I have to press back this triangle. If I don't, I'm going to trap all of that and then it won't work. So I'm just going to give it a quick little finger press, and you've got to do both sides. Okay, so I don't know why that flipped out on me for a second. It looked like it had turned itself off, but it's showing again, so we're going to hope it's working still properly. All right, so now I'm going to match up the point to the point. If I'm doing bunches and bunches of these, I would probably take all of them to the ironing board and press them with the iron. But for what I'm doing, I can make sure that I finger press those seams back. You just don't want to be real heavy-handed with your iron or your fingers when you're finger pressing, because you've got bias edges on these pieces that you're stitching, and I'm just giving it a quick little finger press. And notice I'm just giving short little strokes with my thumbnail to press that back. Line up point to point. Let the little flat part hang off. If you want to, you can flip it over and sew it this direction so that you are lining up the diamond shape. This is typically what I do. Once I get those points matched up, then I just flip the whole thing and sew from the diamond side. But you're going to see it'll work both ways. But you have to press back, finger press back both sides. I think I just did that wrong on the one before, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Every now and then you see me make a mistake. It happens. So I'm going to flip over, and I'm pretty sure that I didn't press back one of them. And I'm just lining up the edges there. Preparing my pieces ahead of time is you don't always see the mistakes I made. So I'm just going to keep finger pressing that. the other one flipped back and press it down. And I am matching up the point to the point. And then if you feed through this way, I tend to hold down the triangle so that as I feed this through, it stays connected where I want it to be connected. So let's just see if I goofed up. We may get lucky and I didn't. We'll see. So there, this one's right, this one's right, this one's right, this one's not. And let me show you why. This is the piece I just added, but I got in a hurry and I did not flip this triangle back. So guess what? That will not work. So we're going to grab my handy dandy little seam ripper, take out a few stitches here so I can flip that triangle that's underneath back. That's what I mean by saying you have to flip back that triangle before you add the next one. So proof that you have to flip that back. Notice that as I'm taking out stitches, I'm breaking a few stitches here and there, and I'm not tugging on the fabric. It's okay to grab a hold of the thread. I'll show you in just a minute. My stitches are so good, I can't get under them. You can grab the thread and pull. You just don't want to grab the fabric and pull. So I'm going to just peel that back, finger press the first triangle I put on, and then get that stitched on there. And I'm just going to stitch right over my original stitching. Since I'm pressing to one side, I don't have to worry about having an extra little line of stitching there. Now, since I've already done the finger pressing on those first two triangles, I don't have to worry about this third one because it's not going to get trapped. But I am going to add my point to my point, line that up. I'm going to line up here, let that part just kind of float on the bottom, and I want to make sure my point matches my point. I didn't even hear, Kim said she saw me make the mistake and she was sitting there yelling at me, but I didn't hear her. So, but I was going to say, every mistake there is that you could possibly make, the reason I generally know how to fix them, guess what? I've made them already. I'm usually just very quiet about it, and it's not usually with an audience. So, see, I am human. So we're going to go add my last triangle, and let me show you. I'll grab this one and show you. Because I have those first two triangles flipped back, then when I add the last two triangles, it works just fine. So let me grab the other two and put the last two triangles on, and then we'll talk about pressing and trimming. And then I'm going to show you a fun little technique that you have to be able to do in order to complete that center section. There are lots and lots of blocks that use the unfinished seam technique, and that's what we're going to be doing. I'll line up. And I didn't line that as well as I could, but I am guiding from my diamond shape, so I know that it's going to turn out just fine because I have room to trim. So now we're going to the overhead camera so you can see the pressing process and the trimming process. Now at one time I had the iron on, but let me turn it on so it can heat up. And I'll get rid of some of these other things that are laying around here while it's heating. So when you get ready to press this, one thing you do want to be aware of is you don't want to be real heavy-handed with your iron or with your finger pressing. And notice I'm just kind of giving it a quick finger press first, That way, that gets the seams going the direction I need for them to go in order for it to lay down properly. And I do that as a general rule with everything. I know you've probably seen a lot of people just grab a unit like this and take their iron and just shove those seams over. That's a recipe for disaster because your pieces are not necessarily going to turn out as accurate as they should if you haven't gotten those seams already headed the direction they need to go. So take that little bit of extra time and finger press those seams so that they're headed the right direction. I'm going to do this one real quick, and then I'm going to set the iron back on the base so it can heat back up. And then I'm going to grab my acorn pressing pin. So notice when I did the first part of this, I put my two opposite triangles on. Let me get those out of the way. Two opposite triangles on, finger pressed, two opposite triangles on, finger pressed, press the whole thing, and now I'm going to grab my acorn pressing pin, just give it a little swipe all the way around. And I tend to do a couple of them at a time because while these two are heating up and flattening really well, I can you tell it's not level? It keeps sliding. So I'm going to put the acorn pressing pin on the last block. My pressing area. The issue is there's a little board under here and I've kind of warped it because I put that board on there to protect the cutting mat that's underneath. So now I'm ready to trim. So there is my diamond Rex unit. If you're left-handed, turn your diamond sideways. And you're going to cut up the short side on the left and across the top. I'm not left-handed, so I'm not going to try that. I'm going to put my diamond on here vertically, and I'm looking for the X's that have the number for the size I want. So I have a 2x4 and a 2x4. That's going on the top and the right side intersection. Once I get that in place, then I just kind of tweak it until the other two X's, now these don't have a number on them, but because they're connected all the way around for my diamond, I know that they're the right ones. And then I can trim up the long side, across the short side, lift your tool and turn your unit 180 degrees. Now the 2.5 by 4.5 inch lines are the lines that I'm going to line up with, and I want to check all my intersections to make sure they land on one of those X's. And up and over, and I have a perfectly trimmed 2.5 by 4.5 inch unit, and my seam allowance is exactly where I need it to be for it to fit properly. So I'm going to grab the next one, do the very same thing. I'm lining up the 2x4 on the top and the right side, tweak it till the bottom and the left side match up, and turn 180 degrees. Line up again and check all my intersections, make sure they're still lined up. And I'm going to do that with all 4 of my diamond Rex units. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you line up to do that unfinished seam technique. It's a good technique to know because you can do a lot of interesting blocks by using this unfinished seam techniques. There's a lot of traditional blocks out there that have been around for decades that use the unfinished seam technique. Line up the 2x4, 2x4 on the top and the right. Trim 2 sides. I didn't push quite hard enough to get that seam allowance right up there. And we'll turn and I'll get the last 2. Line that up. So I've got all 4 of my diamond Rex units trimmed and they're ready to stitch. So I've got the center and my 4 diamond Rex. Let's go to the sewing area so you can see how I put this together with the unfinished seam. So Diana asked, do I ever use steam? The answer to that is yes. if I'm the only one using my iron. If you are in a classroom setting, sometimes steam can be a problem for a couple of reasons. If your fabric is not a high quality fabric, steam can distort it to where it will never be accurate. The other problem is if I've come to class and I have not steamed my fabric, and then I cut whatever pieces I'm working with, and then I go to the classroom iron and steam, I can distort what I just sewed, and it might have been accurately cut. It might even have been accurately stitched, but the steam relaxes the fibers so that when the heat hits it, it presses them back, and sometimes that distorts. So it can be a problem. I use a lot of steam, but I steam my fabric before I cut anything. So if you've ever been here to the shop, you see us use a steam iron, and yes, I do use steam. But in a classroom setting, generally I turn the steam off, just in case, because you're safer to not use the steam. I also use Best Press for preparing my fabric. Starch is your friend because it will help everything lay down nice and flat. Now, if you are going to do the unfinished seam technique, you're going to start stitching, and I want to show you there are two ways to lay this here, and you have to decide which way you're going to do it. And I'm going to put these here so that they are not the same. So see if I can back out and see if you can see how that is different. With this one, where I've already stitched it, I started with the top unit and I stitched to my center starting on the left side of that seam. And if you can see how I've laid this out here, this one would be stitched starting on the top left seam. That would make this circle spin the opposite direction than this one does, which is fine if you want to stitch it this way, especially if you're just doing one block. But if I have a whole quilt and some of them I start this direction and some of them I start this direction, that could be a problem because they are going to spin in opposite directions. If that's not a problem for you, then it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to stitch this one exactly like I stitched this one so you can see how I did it. The easiest way, I think, is to match up my square on the top right corner of my diamond shape. And I'm going to come down a little tighter so you can see. And it's called an unfinished seam technique because I'm going to stitch part of the way across this square, but I'm going to stop and I'm going to leave myself an inch or so for later so I can finish it. So I'm going to stitch about, let's go about halfway. And I am going to take a couple of back stitches and I'm going to cut. And let me get rid of my fabric tag right now because this is the time you're not really going to use your fabric tag. In some projects, you would press toward the square, and in some projects, you would press toward the rectangle. And this is always involving a rectangle and a square, or a series of rectangles and a square. On this one, I'm going to press toward the square just because it's easier to not have the bulk that this would have later if you press toward the diamond. So I'm pressing toward the square, and now I'm just finger pressing, and this is the part, let me see if I can flip this up so you can see it, where it's not stitched, right there. Now I'm just going to turn and I'm going to grab another diamond and I'm going to line that up and it's going to stitch all the way across. Now if I have cut properly, trimmed properly, this point of this diamond should match that seam, and I'm going to make sure that it does simply by grabbing a pin. I'm going to pin into the intersection where the diamond is, and then I'm going to pin into that seam, and I'm going to buddy those up together. And I'm going to grab another pin. The first pin is my placement pin. This is my pin that's going to stabilize it. And I have the corners matching here. I'm going to line those up. We're just going to stitch right onto that. And then I want the end of this whole seam to match up with that corner underneath there. And I've got it, I've grabbed a hold of it and I'm holding on to it and I'm just kind of following it as it feeds through. And we haven't talked a lot this series about pin to sew over pins or to not sew over pins. If you do, slow down, because as a general rule, if you're not going just lightning fast, you can sew over a pin and not worry about your needle hitting that pin and causing yourself a problem. So there's my next piece, and I'm going to press toward the square. So either way, you've got an issue, because now I'm pressing toward the top point of the diamond. And I'm going to show you how you can fix that. We're just going to finger press that, turn, grab another diamond and line up. Again, I'm going to pin here into that seam. And this is my 1/4 inch, and I'm just kind of eyeballing a 1/4 inch on that seam. You'll get to where if you do this enough, you can eyeball it and get just pretty close. So I'm going to grab that and stitch right along the side. Now, if you're going to take your pins out before you get to them, here's what I would do. I would get everything lined up the way you want to. When you get to the pin, stop with your needle in the down position and then take the pin out. I've somehow disabled my needle down positioner. I'll have to worry about that later. And so I took that pin out as I got to it. You just don't want to race across pins. And again, I'm going to press toward the square. Notice that comes right to a point. This point right here, I'm going to press that direction, but I'll fix that in a minute and I'll show you how. Now, here is my partial seam that I started with. I'm just going to flip this back out of my way, grab my last diamond, and this is where I'm going to pin right into that seam. And I'm going to land right there to that seam. And on that intersection, grab another pin to stabilize it. So that's going to line up the corners here. When you get to your pin, either slow down and carefully go across it or take it out. And I'm lining up the corner. This is that square where I did not finish that first seam. I'm going to sew right off the end of that. And let's grab a fabric tag and park my needle for a second where we can talk. So I've got all 4 diamonds stitched on except that last part where I started. This is the seam that I have to finish. So I'm going to press toward the square, and I can flip this part over, line up the corners. They should match. I'm actually more interested in this seam right here. So where that seam crisscrosses, I'm going to grab that, stitch into there, and line that up. And I'm ready to stitch and finish this seam. This is my completion of that first seam. And you can see right here, there's a piece of fuzz there, but you can see right there where I started this seam. Let me pull it down where you can see. There's a piece of fuzz there, but there's my first stitches. And I'm going to stitch across this seam until I connect with that. So I'm just going to stitch across here, slow down and go across my pin, connect the seam so that it's completed, and now I have a completed, finished seam. Let me get rid of this. And because I started stitching on the same side, my 2 pieces, even though they're not going to go in the same block, but I wanted you to see why it made a difference. Now, another thing you can do, I could have pressed the seams open as I went, but I wanted to show you that you do have options. Because I want this to be able to press toward, away from this point, I can actually clip the seam right there. And I often do this so that on the back, this one goes toward the direction that the nose of that diamond is pointing. If your fabric is very, very light, it might be a problem doing this because it might actually shadow through. But my fabric is not all that light, and so I'm not having an issue just by snipping that seam. So this seam can go this way, this seam can go this way. And I actually did, I'll show you what I did to the other one. Just so you can see, there really are no quilt police. You can do it however it needs to be to lay down and look like you want it to look. So I've got all of the wider part of my diamond. That seam is pressed toward the square. The point of my diamond is pressed toward the next diamond. And from the front, once I press this, it's going to lay down nice and flat. All my points are going to be where they belong. The point of my diamond is going to feed right into the next seam. But I wanted you to see this one I pressed open. So you can do whichever one. You just want to be consistent, because once you start pressing open, you kind of have to continue that, or you're going to have doing some extra little snipping. But I can take this to the ironing surface and press this whole piece, and it's ready to go into the center of my block. Okay, so let me look back real quick and make sure there's no questions about that so far. And this one is, we're good so far. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do the side kick and the high-low. This is not totally new because we did this before. It is a V-block technique. But the most important thing for this particular section, I'm going to flip this back so you can just see the side kick unit. Because the angle here that I'm cutting is opposite that angle, the only way you can cut this shape is to flip your fabric upside down, and I'll show you what I mean. For the side kick, I need a square, and I have a square, and I actually need 4 of these, but I have several squares because I've got more than I need. I've got the wrong size square. This is actually my corners. Here they are. They are oversized, and your cutting information will give you the sizes you need. So I have my squares stacked back to back, back to back. And then if I cut a square for that first piece here, because of the way they're stacked, I'm automatically going to get a right and a left, and I'll show you. Now this you're going to want to cut right on the dashed line. And I'm going to line up here and I'll show you what happens. Because I have these stacked, this one is automatically going to be the one that will go for this unit. This one will go here. That will make this unit. See how it leans the opposite direction? If I lay these here, it'll be more apparent because I've got the right side facing up, but I need my side kick to lean from the middle up to the top right. I need my high-low to lean from the middle up to the top left. So that's what I got by placing my squares face to face or back to back, and I get a mirror image. For this block, this works really well because I need some of both. If you're doing a project where you need a bunch like this, then you're going to have to stack all of your squares face up to get that orientation to be right for this one. If you need a bunch that are this direction, you're going to have to cut with your square face down. I know that's probably hard to see in the camera, but that gives me the angle I need. So that's also a good way to decide is look at your fabric, look the right side of your fabric, and see if I cut this square and I cut that part off, is that going to lean the way I need for it to lean? If not, then I may need to be having my square laying face down. I'll show you one that's face down. And the information in your cutting guide tells you to lay the face down for the side kick and face up for the high-low. So I've got my 4 high-lows and my 4 side kicks ready. So for the pieces that I need to replace what I cut away, I also need rights and lefts. So I can actually take a strip that is face to face or back to back. This one happens to be back to back the way it comes off of your fabric. This time you're going to go to the bold solid line and we're going to cut a replacement triangle. And I can tell this one has to go here to replace that triangle. This one has to go here. It is possible to put them in the wrong place. Let me turn it right sides up. You can tell that is not correct because it should look basically like a square if I've got it in the right place. This will make a lot more sense as you're cutting your own. Now, when I get ready to cut the next one, I twist around. I find that long common diagonal line, and I've marked mine with a red Sharpie. And I encourage you to mark your rulers for lines that you have to find and use often. So there's my replacement triangles for these 2 sections. I'm going to twist back. Again, I'm looking for the bold solid line, and this is going to line up with my cut 4-inch strips because I'm making 3-inch finished units. And then I have one more to cut. I'm going to twist all the way around, find that long common diagonal, and I even wrote side triangle number 2. Some of the tools already have some of these little tips already printed on them, but this one, I just wrote it on there myself. So there is what I need for the side kick and the high-low. So I'm going to stitch just this one, and I'll show you why. If I do the first step here, that's going to be exactly what you do here, and then you finish with that. I think I'm just going to do one of each, just for the sake of time. And you can tell when you have the right one, and I'll show you how I know that. Grab this and bring it over to the sewing area with me so I can see. So any other questions so far? I think I've gotten everything answered that was asked. So I have my 2 units. This one is the one that goes from the center bottom up to the top right. And I'm just going to flip that over. I don't have to fuss with it. I just kind of center it on there. And notice it has a little bit of an ear on both ends. There's a little ear right there at the top, and there's a little ear here at the bottom. And I just kind of center it on there. Let me grab a fabric tag, and you're going to sew onto the fabric tag and stitch right across that seam. And I'm stitching right along the edge there. And now this one is the opposite one. And again, you're still going to have that little ear on both ends. And I have stitched one of each, and I'll show you in just a second how to do the next step. Basically, the high-low is a 2-step process, and the side kick is a single-step process. So if I needed just high-lows, I would have 2 high-lows, one of each direction, right here that I've just stitched, and I'll show you. I'm just going to give this a quick little finger press so you can see. Remember, when you finger press, don't run your finger across the whole seam. Just do little short strokes just to get the seam to lay down where you need for it to. And if you have fabric that has a definite right and wrong side, this is a little easier to accomplish. If you have fabric that it's hard to tell which is the right side and which is the wrong side, that could be a challenge for you. But see how these are opposite? This one leads from the bottom, middle, up to the top left. This one leads from the bottom, middle, up to the top right. This is the one that the step one is all you do. You don't add the high-low. This is just the side kick. I'm just going to lay this aside because I want to show you what you do for the, I'm trying to find a magic wand. This, and I've already marked it, so I don't even have to find that. This is my side kick, and that, or a high-low, it has a high point and a low point. I've drawn one line across that smaller square, and the instructions tell you what size that square needs to be, and just stitch right across the line. This is kind of a folded corners technique, with the beauty of it being that it's oversized. So you're going to trim away anything that is more than what you need. So I'm going to take this to the ironing surface so you can see how I would do this. And I, of course, would make 4 of each. So this one is my side kick because it just has the single step. This one's the high-low because it has the high point and the low point. The first thing I'm going to do is just grab a tool and trim off the excess of this. Then I'm ready to press. Just going to give it a quick little finger press so that it lays down the way I need for it to. And this one too. And I finger pressed that before I ever left the sewing area. I've lost my, there it is. Started to say I've lost my acorn pressing pin. Just going to give that a quick little swipe and give this a swipe on both sides. And I'm ready to trim. And of course, I would have 4 of each. So for my high-low, this one up here, I'm going to trim basically the same way I do a V block. And I'm going to do this one first. Because I have a V, even though this is a short side, I still have that illusion of a V. And I'm going to match up. I'm making a 3-inch finished unit. And so this line right here has my finished size. I find the number 3. That X goes right on the intersection. And only one side will line up here. This one doesn't really line up with the seam. Normally, if I'm making a V-block unit, there would be a seam all the way up that long diagonal line. But there's my first cut, and I'm going to turn 180 degrees. This time, I'm looking for the 3.5-inch lines. That's my cleanup lines. I'm going to get that in place. There will be a bold X that will land right on that intersection, and there's my high-low unit. For my side kick unit, it works very much the same, but all I have to do is line up with one line, depending on whether I'm doing a right or a left side kick. I want to make sure that that intersection leaves me room all the way around my 3.5-inch square, and it does. So I'm going to trim up, trim across, turn 180 degrees, and then I'm ready to add my last cut. I'm looking for the 3.5-inch square. It's going to be right there, and I'm going to cut up and across. There is my side kick. So these go together like that. Now looking at this, it doesn't look like they will line up. But if I have trimmed them properly, 1/4 inch in is actually in the exact same spot to line up with 1/4 inch in here, and that will give you that nice sharp intersection here. And because I pressed my first section when I did the center of this one the other day, I pressed all of this open. I pressed these open as well. Now on this, I didn't worry about that because there's not going to be a whole lot of bulk there, but I could have pressed this seam open as well. I could do like I did on tonight's version, do a little snipping here and there to get it to lay down the direction I need it to. But that's the basic process for making the peaks and valleys block. So, any other questions that I need to look at before we close off? Go back to here. I don't see anything else that has questions. So as always, if you have questions between sew along times, put them in the comments, send an email, or just start a post on our Facebook page so I can know to look for those questions and I'll answer them. Be sure and look for the cutting instructions and the pattern for tonight's block, the peaks and valleys. Next week we'll be doing block 17, and I don't remember the name of it, but that's what we'll be doing next week. So until then, happy sewing. Come and see us when you can, and stay nice and warm. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.